Hello guys, welcome back to our anime explainer. Guys, please like the video and subscribe to my channel. Today is explanation of Soul Land 2 Peerless Tang Men based on novel. So let's start. Furthermore, I suspect that Di Qian has a second soul core. His abilities are already close to that of a god. If you're human, he might have been accepted by the godly realm already. Huo Yuhao listened very seriously. To him, such knowledge was simply too important. This has also allowed him to clearly see his future path of development. Elder Xian smiled and said, Yuhao, it's much easier for you to become an ultimate Doluo compared to us. This is because you have twin martial souls. Remember, you must aim to achieve double soul cores the moment you become a titled Doluo. As long as you can form black holes with those two soul cores, you can easily overcome the barrier to becoming an ultimate Doluo. Hi, it's a pity that time is not on our side. If you had another 30 years to become an ultimate Doluo, why would we be afraid of Yishishure and Long Xiaoyao? An ultimate Doluo with twin martial souls would be much stronger than both of them. You could even possibly challenge Di Qian. Huo Yuhao said, Elder Xian, how can soul power be stabilized as it transforms into a black hole? In my experiments, I found myself losing control before the revolution of my soul power had generated sufficient spatial power. The key lies in my fear. I feared that I would suffer some kind of backlash once I lost control. This is why I don't even know what my limit is. Elder Xian laughed and said, Fool, don't be too ambitious. You're only a soul sage right now. Even though you have twin martial souls, you're still a soul sage. You can't possibly form a soul core right now. However, you have a very great advantage over other soul masters. Because of this advantage, I'm confident that you can directly form double soul cores when you become a titled Doluo. Are you talking about my spiritual power? Huo Yuhao immediately understood what Elder Xian meant. Elder Xian nodded and replied, That's right, it's your spiritual power. Your spiritual power is greater than most other ordinary soul masters, comparable to a titled Doluo. There are very few spiritual type soul masters, but a spiritual type titled Doluo will most certainly become a transcendent Doluo. This is because spiritual type soul masters have greater control than most ordinary soul masters. It's fine for you to carry out such experiments right now. At least you'll get to accumulate experience. However, don't be too fixated on it. You can't help it if your abilities aren't up to par. As your soul power is insufficient, you can't possibly compress all your soul power inside your soul core when you change it from the fluid to the solid state. The bigger the soul core, the stronger the titled Doluo. Huo Yuhao was moved and asked, Elder Xian, if I try to form a soul core right now, what might happen? Elder Xian was stunned for a moment, then smiled. First, it's almost impossible. While your control might be strong, it's very difficult to control spatial power. If things go wrong, you'll be courting your own death. During the process of carrying out soul power compression, the demands on a soul master's physical tenacity are very great. One's body is like a container that stores soul power, whereas the transformation of soul power from a fluid to a solid state will generate immense energy. If your body isn't strong enough, you'll blow apart and die. This is why you can't just try for fun. Assuming you really succeed, your future cultivation is bound to increase significantly. A solid soul core absorbs origin energy at a much faster speed than your meditation right now. However, what will happen when you reach rank 90? You already have one soul core, and you can't possibly compress all your soul power inside it. When you reach rank 90, you'll need to attempt the compression of your second soul core. It's only in this way that you'll become a titled Doluo. However, your soul core will definitely appear in your Dantian. There's a very high possibility that your first soul core will form in your Dantian as well. There's also a possibility that you can form two at the same time. However, if there's already one soul core in your Dantian, you'll have to take a look at my condition if you want to form a second soul core somewhere else. Elder Xian was a little helpless as he pointed to himself. Huo Yuhao understood what he meant. According to Elder Xian, assuming that he did the impossible and formed a first soul core, it would be as difficult for him to form a second soul core, as it was to become an ultimate Doluor from a rank 98 transcendent Doluor. I understand. Thank you. Huo Yuhao nodded gently. Elder Xian said, didn't you say you wanted to challenge your limits earlier? You can try. I'll watch over you. I would also like to see how good your control is. I suggest you try with 1/10 of your soul power. When your soul power reaches the solid state, and continues to increase until you feel like you can't control it anymore, I'll be here. Don't worry. I'll ensure your safety. Huo Yuhao was delighted, thanks Elder Xian. Shall I start now? Yes, you can start now. Huo Yuhao first calmed himself down and adjusted his state of mind. He shut his eyes, and his spiritual power started to flow. He also checked his soul power in his body. Elder Xian stood by one side and silently nodded. This kid is still as composed as ever. He's not lost his cool at all. When Huo Yuhao opened his eyes again, his eyes were already covered with a layer of gold. He slowly lifted his right hand, and his milky white soul power started to flow out. As his soul power was in the fluid state, it looked like a puddle of milk in his palm. None of his soul power seeped out of his hand as he controlled it using his spiritual power. More and more of his soul power started to appear and drift above Huo Yuhao's palm. It was slowly revolving. This time, Huo Yuhao had poured out more soul power than he did the previous 2 times in his experiments. With Elder Xian protecting him, he naturally didn't need to worry too much. Under his control, the circulation of his soul power started to increase in speed. At the same time, it also started to slowly compress. During the process of compression, Huo Yuhao slowly increased the input of his soul power. His fluid soul power started to become viscous, but its speed kept on increasing under Huo Yuhao's intentional control. There was a layer of gold surrounding his white soul power. It was this layer of gold that protected his soul power from seeping away. If it were any other 7-ringed soul master, his soul power would quickly vaporize if he let his soul power out of his body, just like that without using any soul skills. After vaporizing, his soul power would then vanish into the air. Elder Xian nodded in approval as he watched Huo Yuhao's control of his spiritual power. Even though this didn't drain too much of his spiritual power, there was a very great demand on detail. It wasn't easy for Huo Yuhao to do something like this. His soul power was slowly transforming from the fluid to the solid state. Huo Yuhao's expression also started to turn serious. However, his soul power didn't shift in the slightest under his control. It continued to constantly revolve. It had finally transformed into the solid state. It was very difficult to imagine a soul sage doing this. Elder Xian was in awe, and also became more focused. He was ready to react to any situation. Huo Yuhao's soul power kept on compressing and revolving. Slowly, his solid soul power took form. The little funnel that Huo Yuhao was familiar with appeared. As he had poured more soul power into it this time, the appearance of the funnel caused a greater suction of origin energy from outside compared to before. The terrifying suction force directly spread outward. Inside the sea god's pavilion, origin energy was in abundance. Suddenly, Huo Yuhao felt as if the energy from this little whirlpool had increased at a rate that was at least twice as quick compared to the previous 2 experiments. Distorted lights around his solid soul power started to become more and more evident. The intense suction force didn't just suck in origin energy. It was also absorbing Huo Yuhao's own soul power. Huo Yuhao had no choice but to continuously pour his soul power into it to enhance the strength of his solid soul power. Very good, continue. Don't worry. Let me see what standard you can reach. Elder Xian's voice sounded in Huo Yuhao's ears, alleviating his worries. However, he didn't immediately increase the output of his soul power. Rather, he allowed his soul power to absorb the soul power in his body. At the same time, he kept on strengthening the control of his spiritual power in a bid to maintain the stability of his solid soul power. Elder Xian had mentioned before that he had to maintain the stability of his solid soul power if he wanted to make it his soul core. Once stability was lost, a huge explosion would ensue. That would be very perilous. Under Huo Yuhao's intentional control, his solid soul power started to stabilize, as well as continuing to strengthen. The surge of origin energy also became faster and faster. Huo Yuhao even saw dim gold appearing on the walls in the room. The golden tree was absorbing origin energy from the outside world, just as it was pouring out origin energy. This went to show that Huo Yuhao's solid soul power was absorbing origin energy at an immensely quick rate. Elder Xian's body lit up with a layer of dim golden light, isolating him from the outside world. This was because Huo Yuhao's solid soul power was already starting to absorb his own soul power. However, Elder Xian was able to isolate it, given that there was a huge difference in their cultivations. A mysterious look slowly appeared across Huo Yuhao's face. On his forehead, his eye of destiny had already slowly opened. He increased the output of his spiritual power once again, and continued to control the revolution of his solid soul power with stability. Seconds passed, and more than half of Huo Yuhao's soul power had already fused into this solid soul power. He also started to feel that he was slowly losing control of the revolution of this solid soul power. His spiritual control was still maintaining its stability. However, it was impossible for him to stop it anymore. If he did so, there would only be one result, an explosion. Huo Yuhao's spiritual power didn't weaken in the slightest, as he continued to pour out his soul power. Elder Xian was stunned to discover that the spiritual power surrounding the solid soul power was getting stronger and stronger. It had even turned from the original gold to rose gold. It was as if a layer of solid spiritual power existed and perfectly maintained the stability of the solid soul power. His spiritual power is really strong. It seems like I have underestimated the strength of his spiritual power. It is much stronger than I expected. Perhaps this kid's spiritual cultivation has improved recently. Elder Xian was right. After experiencing the war between the Star Luo Empire and Sun Moon Empire, Huo Yuhao was even personally involved in a fight between Ultimate Doluo. His body had suffered critical injuries, but he had developed a deeper understanding of spiritual aspects. After all, the spiritual power of two Ultimate Doluo was stronger than his. Under the kind of pressure that he faced, his spiritual power naturally grew as it was stimulated. At this tier, even a minor increase in his spiritual power was still considered a huge improvement. The terrifying soul power undulations continued, and Huo Yuhao started to find it a little overwhelming. He could still hold on in terms of his spiritual power, but the solid soul power was absorbing his soul power at a faster speed, just as the amount of soul power in his body was less than that in the form of the solid soul power. Huo Yuhao only felt as if the soul power in his body was rushing out, whereas the revolution of the solid soul power had reached a speed that he couldn't see properly even with his spirit eyes. 50%, 60%, 70%. When more than 70% of his soul power had been absorbed from his body, Huo Yuhao already couldn't control the output of his soul power. What he couldn't see was that the entire Sea God's Pavilion had already let out dim golden light. Above the Sea God's Pavilion, origin energy had already formed clouds in the air. Immense origin energy continuously gathered in the direction of the golden tree. Some of the elders in the Sea God's Pavilion were awakened from their cultivation at this moment. How could they possibly not notice such a great disturbance in the pavilion? Is someone trying to become a transcendent Doluo? This was their immediate reaction. This was because something as strange as this only appeared when someone was trying to form a soul core. After this, they discovered that the core of all the soul power undulations came from Elder Xian's room. To them, this wasn't considered a very impressive level of soul power undulations. Instead, they thought that the undulations were a little weak. There should be a greater disturbance if it was a title Doluo trying to become a transcendent Doluo. However, they weren't worried, since everything was happening in Elder Xian's room. After observing for a while, they all returned to meditate. The concentrated origin energy in the air was also very beneficial to their cultivation. However, the prerequisite was that they had to create a barrier around themselves to prevent their soul power from being sucked away. 80%. More than 80% of Huo Yuhao's soul power had already been devoured. Right now, he needed to use a portion of his spiritual power to control his entire body so that his soul power would leak out at a slower speed. Perspiration had already drenched his forehead, and he started to look paler and paler. However, Elder Xian was very impressed that Huo Yuhao was still able to stabilize and control the solid soul power even under such conditions. He didn't let it shift at all. At this moment, something strange happened. The original milky white solid soul power started to change color, it turned a dim gold. Furthermore, this golden color was intensifying. After seeing this, Elder Xian was astonished. He lifted his head to look at Huo Yuhao. Although Huo Yuhao was already finding it very tough right now, he was still trying his best to hold on. Yuhao, hang on. Your solid soul power is starting to develop elemental characteristics. Perhaps you can really construct a soul core. Your situation is different. If you manage to construct a soul core right now, you might actually reach the rank 89 bottleneck in a much shorter period of time. Although it's still difficult to become a title Doluor, this might be your opportunity. Hang on. After hearing Elder Xian's words, Huo Yuhao was slightly stunned. He continued to use his spiritual power to control the remaining soul power in his body from being sucked out too quickly. This was because the solid soul power was not just absorbing his soul power, it was also absorbing the origin energy in the air. If it sucked less soul power from him, it could absorb more of the origin energy in the air. In addition, Huo Yuhao had the deepest sense of this solid soul power since he was the one who had created it. He could clearly feel that the development of elemental characteristics was on the spiritual level. This meant that this solid soul power contained the spiritual power of his spirit eyes. It was fusing with his first martial soul. His spiritual power kept on growing. His soul power couldn't compare to a title Doluor, but his spiritual power could. Under the effect of his Eye of Destiny, he continued to let out more spiritual power from his body. His Eye of Destiny also turned rose gold. An aura of destiny also started to appear, as he let out his spiritual power. The revolution of his solid soul power continued to speed up. It was slowly turning golden. Apart from the immense soul power undulations, there were also decently strong undulations of spiritual power that appeared. The spiritual power that Huo Yuhao unleashed to protect the solid soul power had even stuck to it and started to be devoured. At this moment, the solid soul power slowed down in its suction of origin energy from the air and Huo Yuhao's soul power. This gave Huo Yuhao an opportunity to catch his breath. I must hang on. Huo Yuhao recognized that his abilities were lacking as he faced off against stronger individuals. He was clearly aware that his current cultivation was still not good enough to challenge individuals of higher cultivations. He had to work hard in his cultivation and increase his abilities right now. Elder Xian had mentioned that this was a great opportunity, which was also what he had thought earlier. As for a future, second soul core, it wasn't impossible for him to form it even if it was difficult. In addition, he had another thought. If he could hang on and wait until his solid soul power formed a soul core, it might even be a stepping stone for him to form a second soul core in the future. The golden color turned more and more intense. The aura of his spirit eyes had already completely immersed into his solid soul power. However, Huo Yuhao's soul power had already been drained such that there was only a little left over. He gritted his teeth and hung on. However, he couldn't just hold on because of the void in his body. He was trembling slightly. Without some soul power to support his body, his ability to let out spiritual power would also be affected. Elder Xian furrowed his brow. He couldn't help Huo Yuhao in the formation of his soul core. It could only be completed by the soul master himself. It seems like Yuhao won't be able to hang on. After all, his cultivation is too weak. Even if he has twin martial souls, his soul power is still not at the level of a title Doluor. It seems like pure spiritual power is still insufficient to complete the formation of a soul core. However, he should be proud of himself for what he's achieved. After all, I was rank 88 when I reached his standard in the past. He's only rank 70 or so right now. The yellow light that Elder Xian released was getting stronger and stronger. He was ready to intervene. When Huo Yuhao couldn't hang on anymore, he would use his soul power to cage in Huo Yuhao's solid soul power, before sending it high up into the air and detonating it. In this way, there shouldn't be much danger. However, Huo Yuhao would need a few days to recover after this experience. The drainage of his soul and spiritual power wasn't something that he could easily recover from. Huo Yuhao's body was already shaking tremendously by now. He was now relying on his willpower to hang on. The immense suction force kept on pulling his body forward. Once he couldn't hang on anymore, he might even be sucked in. A soul master couldn't possibly carry out such an experiment on his own. This was because the end result was death. This was why a soul master needed someone strong to protect him. A soul doluo had some ability to protect himself, since his soul power had already reached a certain standard. Even so, there were many cases of soul doluo getting critically hurt as they tried to become a titled doluo. Just as Elder Xian was ready to intervene, a beam of golden light shone behind Huo Yuhao's back. Following this, a ball of milky white light drilled out from his back. At the same time, a circular barrier appeared in front of him. It helped to isolate the suction force of the solid soul power. Life reflection shield. The ball of milky white light that appeared slowly took form and transformed into a huge iceworm. Rings of golden light patterns subtly appeared. The moment it appeared, a wave of pure soul power was poured into Huo Yuhao's body, stabilizing him. Brother Skydream. Huo Yuhao naturally knew the origin of this force. The Skydream iceworm's voice sounded in his head, continue. I'm here. The moment his voice was heard, the life reflection shield disappeared, and the suction force was felt again, but with the support of the Skydream iceworm, Huo Yuhao managed to recover slightly. The soul power that the Skydream iceworm poured into his body contained concentrated spiritual power. As it was released, the solid soul power's color intensified even more quickly. The gold turned bright gold. Spatial cracks also started to appear around it. The light coming from the Skydream iceworm's body became stronger and stronger. Streaks of milky white light separated from his body and entered Huo Yuhao's body. There was a comforted look in the Skydream iceworm's eyes. What Huo Yuhao didn't know was that the Skydream iceworm had poured in the most origin strength that he had from his million-year cultivation into his body. Even the beast god Di Qian wanted this strength back in the great Star Do forest. The Skydream iceworm was far too valuable, and this origin power wasn't something that Di Qian could take without the Skydream iceworm's consent. Therefore, the beast god had gathered other savage beasts to absorb the Skydream iceworm's soul power that he had obtained after so many years. In the beginning, the Skydream iceworm took his own origin power into Huo Yuhao's body when he had first fused with him. Huo Yuhao's cultivation had thus been able to improve continuously, and his spiritual power's exponential qualitative change all had to do with the Skydream iceworm's origin power. Otherwise, how could his body transform so smoothly? However, the Skydream iceworm didn't give all his origin power to Huo Yuhao, because his body's capacity was far from enough. There was another more important thing that Huo Yuhao didn't know. As long as the Skydream iceworm maintained his origin power and kept it from dissipating, then the Skydream iceworm could still choose another human to merge with even if Huo Yuhao passed away. In this moment, when the Skydream iceworm decided to fuse his most valuable possession into Huo Yuhao's body, Huo Yuhao and he could no longer be separated. Either Huo Yuhao finally stepped onto the path of becoming a god, or he would live and die with him. The truth was, the Skydream iceworm had long contemplated fusing his origin power with Huo Yuhao when Huo Yuhao had interacted with the god realm a long time ago. How much Huo Yuhao's body could bear was sufficient. However, the Ice Empress had stopped him. The Skydream iceworm should wait until a crucial moment and give his origin power to he when Huo Yuhao was breaking through. That would be much more effective. Wasn't this the important opportunity they were waiting for? The Skydream iceworm didn't expect this moment to arrive so quickly. Soul beasts cultivated differently from humans. Therefore, they couldn't guide Huo Yuhao in this respect. However, both the Skydream iceworm and the Ice Empress were some of the strongest people in the world, and they all possessed incredibly strong abilities within their domains. Of course, they could see that this moment was an incredible opportunity for improvement to Huo Yuhao. An opportunity like that only came once in a blue moon at least. Such opportunities were considerably rare. It would be a pity to miss it. The Skydream Iceworm's origin power was incredibly strong, because his was a pure and perfect fusion between spiritual power and soul power. The Skydream Iceworm had completely discarded his element of ice when he was helping Huo Yuhao construct his second martial soul. The Skydream Iceworm only had pure soul power and spiritual power at this moment. This was the reason why he was most suitable for helping Huo Yuhao form his first soul core. Elder Xian's eyes were wide with astonishment. Huo Yuhao was already almost overcome with weakness, but the enormous iceworm's appearance behind his back enabled his spirit to swiftly recover, while his soul power was being unleashed at an exponentially quicker rate, and continuously as well. It didn't take long before the volume of the solid-state soul power he had created was comparable to that of a soul Doluo. That was just unbelievable. It was the first time that Elder Xian had seen such a thing. Even though a powerful martial soul can help soul masters store a certain amount of soul power, Huo Yuhao is storing far more than he should be able to. Furthermore, his two martial souls are the Spirit Eyes and the Ice Empress Jade Scorpion. What is with this huge worm? Does this mean that spirits can help soul masters store even more soul power? Elder Xian shook his head exasperatedly. Prodigies and geniuses cultivate in a different fashion from what is the norm after all. I'll just wait and see to what stage he can reach. The cracks around the funnel-shaped soul power began to turn gold, while the black hues that belonged to spatial cracks began to appear within the golden colors. Huo Yuhao realized to his surprise that when his spiritual power reached a certain level inside the solid-state soul power, it was just as the fusion of soul power and spiritual power was like inside his own body. The state of his soul power was very similar to when he was unleashing his three ultimate Haodong skills, while the only difference was that his soul power was now solid instead of liquid. It seems like solid-state soul power is still a reflection of my own ability after all. However, Huo Yuhao realized some even stranger things right at this moment. The solid soul power was still absorbing his soul power and spiritual power, while Huo Yuhao could still hang on with the Skydream Iceworm replenishing him. This solid soul power was starting to absorb more than just those two things. It was actually gradually absorbing the spatial power contained within the cracks in space. Is this where the secrets of creating the combination lie? Huo Yuhao widened his eyes, and was working hard to control everything while observing closely at the same time. Yes, it's like that. The solid soul power was clearly swallowing the spatial power contained within the cracks in space. It was very strange. The cracks in space became increasingly larger as their spatial power was absorbed, while even more spatial power filled them. Furthermore, Huo Yuhao's spiritual power was being expended at an exponentially faster rate, while the wild and violent spatial power was tearing at his spiritual power. Huo Yuhao wouldn't have been able to hang on if not for his Eye of Destiny. Time continued to pass. The Skydream Iceworm, that was almost material behind his back, also became increasingly illusory. The Iceworm's origin power had already integrated into the solid soul power through Huo Yuhao's body. Even if his experiment ultimately ended in failure, the origin energy of heaven and earth would be very beneficial for him, especially with respect to his fusion of soul power and spiritual power. The Skydream Iceworm would truly become his spirit after everything ended, and they would be inseparable, just like the Snow Empress. The Skydream Iceworm's origin power that was coming from behind him became increasingly weak. Huo Yuhao could feel his body descending into weakness once more, and he gritted his teeth as he tried his best to hang on. Even though he didn't know what kind of price the Skydream Iceworm was paying, Huo Yuhao could still feel his weakness. Brother Skydream has given so much to help me, I have to hold on, no matter what. He gritted his teeth and continued releasing more spiritual power. There was nothing he could do about his soul power, so he could only keep working through spiritual power. The spiritual power in his spiritual sea flowed as if it were limitless, and even more strangely, the aura of destiny within his Eye of Destiny seemed to become stronger. A faint shadow of the three-eyed golden lion actually surfaced behind his back and enveloped his entire being in a layer of rose-gold colors. Huo Yuhao was giving his all in this moment. If he failed at compressing his soul core, he would be severely injured, and this could possibly end in worse injuries than when all his passageways were shattered. In the end, he even used all of his own origin power that he could control. The cracks in space became increasingly strong. The contortions and ripples in space, along with that strange sensation, were all deeply imprinted into Huo Yuhao's mind. It wasn't easy to sense spatial undulations from day to day. One could create those cracks in space with forceful attacks, but those cracks would only appear for an instant before disappearing again, so sensing and studying them would be impossible. However, those spatial undulations were appearing around his compressed solid-state soul power continuously and finely. They were closely related to his soul power and spiritual power, so studying and sensing them became very easy. Beads of sweat began to appear on Elder Xian's forehead, because he was nervous. Elder Xian could tell that Huo Yuhao was continuously releasing soul power and spiritual power, and every possible strength in his body was reaching their respective limits. Elder Xian also understood that he would inflict heavy damage to Huo Yuhao if he interrupted him at such a moment. But fusing with the mixture wasn't as simple as creating it. The individual's body had to be able to bear the mixture. Huo Yuhao had only recently become a soul sage, and he had just sustained severe injuries. Could he really absorb the soul core into his body? The cracks in space on the surface of the solid soul power became closely woven like a web. Black cracks appeared continuously, and the solid-state soul power's absorption and rotation speed were nearing their absolute limits. All space was being completely distorted around it, and all Huo Yuhao could see was a ball of gold, rose gold and black merged together into a strange sphere, which contained frightening soul power. Come! Collapse! Huo Yuhao roared in his heart, and he transformed the meager remainder of his spiritual power into spiritual shock, before he fused that entirely into the solid-state soul power. It was at this time that the Skydream iceworm behind him gave every last bit of his origin power. The Skydream iceworm transformed into a beam of flowing light, reintegrated into his body, and vanished. Success would be determined in this exact moment. The solid-state soul power quivered faintly. Huo Yuhao had a strange feeling in this moment that the solid-state soul power, which was rotating ever so quickly, had suddenly stopped. It went from extreme motion to extreme motionlessness. This sudden sensation made him depressed. However, Huo Yuhao felt as if everything had grown blurry around him in the next moment, as if he were now within the starry skies, and only that gentle spatial power was around him. Space suddenly collapsed in that instant, as if everything was collapsing together with his body as the epicenter, while terrifying spatial power immediately tore his body to pieces. However, his body reformed itself after it was torn to pieces, and his consciousness returned. Huo Yuhao saw to his surprise that the solid-state soul power had collapsed into a black hole. Huo Yuhao only took one look before he felt as if his soul were about to be sucked in. There was endless darkness inside the black hole, and there were boundless unknowns, but he couldn't feel the kind of soul power contained within it at all. However, he could clearly feel a connection that resembled a bridge between the black hole and himself. This video will end here.